This special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:30 p.m. We are pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. We extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We have established a quorum, and I will call roll. Ms. Rodriguez.
Present, welcome.
Ms. Kenoyer.
Present, welcome.
Mr. LaFoyle.
Present, welcome.
And thank you for coming. And I'm Dr. Melinda Salinas, and we also have Ms. Renee Pichelle. And to my left, we have Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Carl Montoya.
Present and welcome. And again, I'd like to take just 1 minute and introduce, I'm very happy to introduce the new superintendent that will be beginning July 17th, Dr. Jeanette Ball, if you'd stand up, please. All right.
Thank you. And we'll move on to item number 2, presentation of budget and proposed tax rate for the 2018-2019 fiscal year.
Members of the board, again, this is a yearly process that we have a public hearing before the regular meeting to approve the total package, the budget for the coming year. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Elizondo.
Good evening, everybody. This is a public hearing that we're required to hold for the community to explain to them the budget that is being proposed to the board for adoption for the next school year, and also the tax rate that's going to need to be adopted to be able to support that budget. So I'm going to go through a few slides for the public hearing, and after that, then we'll, of course, convene into the regular meeting shortly after that. So we're when we prepare this presentation, thank you, David. We prepare it in accordance with certain sections of the Texas Education Code, which are outlined here for anybody who's interested in looking at those. And because our school district, our fiscal year begins on July the 1st, our budget has to be adopted by June 30th in order to continue to operate. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to encumber any funds against the school district. So we are well within our timeline. And it says here that we have to adopt it again, by the 30th of June. And we're going to adopt it tonight, hopefully the 25th. When we prepare our budget, we do it with several things in mind. First of all, we review the board goals every year, as well as the superintendent goals, to ensure that our budgets are being developed with those goals in mind. And of course, we are always developing our budgets showing fiscal responsibility. And our goal is always to have a balanced budget. Unfortunately, this year, that's not going to happen, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail. But we did try to prepare the budget with getting it as close to zero as we possibly could. And the board is required to adopt budgets for 3 different funds: the general operating fund, the child nutrition fund, and the interest and seeking fund. And I'll discuss a little bit more about those funds as we move forward. So how are districts funded? We really receive our funds from 4 different major sources. The 2 primary ones are from the state, which we get paid from the state based on the number of students that are in attendance on average every day in our schools. There's also other mechanisms that come within the funding formulas from the state, but that is one of the major blocks of funding that we receive. The other source of funding for the school district, which is major for our school district, are local taxes, and those are the taxes that are paid by our taxpayers. We also receive some federal allocations for the different grants that we receive, whether it be for child nutrition, whether it be for ROTC or impact aid. And there's also other smaller grants that we receive from private sources as well. For the general operating fund, as y'all are aware, board members, we've been having numerous meetings this year on the budget for the 2018-2019 school year. And these are the numbers that we're forecasting for next year. For the revenue, for the total local collection, local revenue section, which again, the majority of that, almost $100 million, is generated through the collection of property taxes from our taxpayers. From the state, we receive approximately $75 million. Not even just as far back as 2 years ago, it was inversed a little bit where the state was actually paying more than we were collecting in taxes, but because of the increase in our appraised values, now we're having more of our money come from local taxpayers than we are from the state. The federal government is contributing about $3.5 million, and the majority of that is coming from what we call it's called SHARS. Those are the services that we provide for the students who have special needs like occupational therapy, speech therapy, and the like, where we get reimbursed from the government for providing those services. And TRS on behalf, and again, for those that don't remember, TRS on behalf is an accounting entry that has to be made for pension purposes, where in the private sector, you may have employees that get paid and the employer pays the matching portion of the FICA, the Social Security. Well, for school district employees, the majority of our employees belong to the TRS, Teacher Retirement System pension plan. And so instead of employers paying a matching portion, the state pays it. And so we have to record it in our books, on both in the revenue side and the expense side. So you'll see that same amount show up on the expense side in a little bit. So for the general operating fund, our total revenue that we're projecting for next year is $187.6 million approximately. And if you would like to see it in more of a pie chart form, it shows you that our local revenue is approximately 53%. Our state's approximately 40% of our budget, and the other percentages are shown there as well. On the expenditure side for the general operating fund, we mainly spend on two major categories and then the TRS on behalf payments. So personnel, which includes all of our payroll and benefits for our employees. For our district for next year, we're projecting $159.5 million. And the operation side, which is everything from turning on the lights to cleaning the buildings, to running our transportation department, we're talking about almost $29 million. And again, the TRS on behalf payment is there for the same amount you saw on the revenue side. So on the expense side, we're projecting about $197.2 million in expenditures. In pie chart form again, our personnel costs comprise approximately 81% of our general operating fund budget, and the other major portion, 15%, being the operations part of it. For our fund balances for the general operating fund, we're projecting that at the end of this school year, we're going to end up with approximately $47.7 million. The revenue that I just reviewed for next year is approximately $187 million, and the expenditure is about $197 million. We're also going to be using, as I had mentioned through our meetings, approximately $2 million of about $5 million that we have in restricted fund balance, that is their state compensatory education funds that can only be used for state comp ed. And in this particular fund, we've allocated additional monies for state comp ed expenditures that are equal to that $2 million. So we're anticipating that our fund balance at the end of next school year is $40 million based on the budget that we were going to present here, that we're presenting tonight. For child nutrition, this is one of the other funds that the board has to adopt. This is the fund where all of our food is served to our students at our schools, and that is the only thing that this fund can be used for, is just to run the child nutrition program, whether it's breakfast or lunch or snacks. And so total local revenue for this fund is about $2 million, and that's generated for the kids that actually pay free, full price for their lunch or for the reduced price lunches. From the state, we receive about $213,000, and that's of a state, the summer feeding program, and a little bit of state matching that they give us for a milk settlement suit that was for many years ago that every school district receives. And the total federal dollars, which is the biggest portion in that fund, comes from the free and reduced lunch program from the USDA and commodities, which is about $10.6 million for next school year. So total revenue for next school year is approximately $13 million for the child nutrition fund. In pie chart form, 82% of our funds are coming from the federal government, and 16% are coming from local sales of breakfast and lunches for the folks that pay for that. On the expense side of the child nutrition fund, our personnel costs are about $5.4 million, and that is to pay for all the folks that work for child nutrition, preparing food, driving it out to the schools, cleaning the cafeterias, all the things you can imagine that involve personnel for child nutrition. And on the operational side, this is mostly for buying the food that we prepare and the trays that it's served on, about $7.7 million. So on the expense side in total, approximately $13 million is what's being projected for next school year for the child nutrition fund. Again, in pie chart form, operations is about 59%, and personnel is about 41%. And their fund balance picture, we're projecting that at the end of this school year, they're going to end up at about $1.5 million, with revenue projections for next year at about $13 million, and expenditures at about $13 million. And our fund balance at the end of next school year is projected to be about $1.3 million. The last fund that the board has to approve a budget for is the INS fund. Some people also call it the debt service fund. This is the fund where we collect the money to pay for our principal and interest payments on all the bonds that we've sold throughout the years. There are two primary funding sources for this particular fund. The primary one is the local tax dollars that are collected from our taxpayers. And for next year, we're anticipating about $37 million in local property taxes for the debt service fund. And from the state, they also assist school districts a little bit with their construction, paying for the construction of the facilities, and it's going to be about $700,000 for next year. So total revenue is going to be approximately $37.7 million. Again, pie chart form, you can see that the majority of the money is coming from our local taxpayers, 98%. On the expense side, it's going to be approximately $37.9 million, and that's the only thing that we can use. The funds that we collect in this fund are to pay those principal and interest payments and a few little escrow for servicing the mortgage, if you will, but they can't be used for any other kind of general expenditures. 100% of our debt goes to that. Now, when you look at the fund balance picture for this fund, and this one's a little bit tricky, so I'm going to try to explain a little bit. So at the end of this school year, we're anticipating that we're going to end up with $25.4 million. For next year, we're going to have revenues of approximately $37 million, expenditures of about $37.9 million. So we're anticipating that next year, at the end of the year, we'll end up with about $25 million in fund balance. Now, the reason that number is so large is because we have a payment that is due on July 1st. And we have to collect taxes for that payment during this year, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to generate that much money in 1 month, because our fiscal year ends in June 30th. So the payment that's due on July 1st is $12.8 million. So it's about half of that $25 million fund balance that we're projecting for next year. So you can kind of calculate that that's going to end up with about a $12 million, $12.6 million fund balance at the end of next year once we make that payment. When you look at all funds together, just to kind of give you an idea, at all the local, state, federal dollars, the TRS on behalf, across all those three funds that we talked about, the revenue is about $238 million that the school district and the board is accounting for in those three funds for the entire year for next year. And if you look at it in the pie chart form, 58% of those funds come from the local taxpayers, 32% coming from the state, and the rest is federal and TRS on behalf. On the expense side, if you look at the same, for the same three funds, personnel costs, as you can tell, as you can see, is the largest amount at $165 million. Total for all three funds is $248 million. So that kind of tells you the size of the organization that we have. And if you look at it in pie chart form, you'll see that 66% is personnel. Keep in mind, though, that a lot of times when you go to classes at TASB specifically, they're talking about what is your percentage, but they're looking at it only with the general operating fund. They're not looking at it as a whole like this. So a little while ago when I said 81%, that's more the number that they're referencing versus the 66%. This is just to give you an idea when you put it all together what it looks like. And then our debt service, when we put the interest in seeking is 15%, and the operations is also 15%. So if we look at the big picture, if you will, the revenues is $238.3 million, expenditures $248 million. When we're looking at what effect is this going to have on our fund balances for this upcoming year if we adopt the budgets that we're presenting, the general operating fund balance is going to have a decrease of about $9.5 million. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the actual budget, during the actual budget presentation, to show you where some of those sources are coming from. Child nutrition is going to have a decrease of about $193,000, and interest in sinking is going to have a decrease of about $300,000. So, and all three of those funds have a very healthy fund balance, but we'll discuss those a little bit more in the actual meeting. Oh, actually, it's right here. So for the fund balance, for again projecting it at the end of next school year, the unassigned general operating fund balance, we're estimating to be at about $40.1 million, which is 20% of our expenditures. The board has a policy that we should not go below 17% of our expenditures, which right now is at about $35 to $36 million. So we still have a little bit of a buffer there. In the child nutrition fund, we have approximately $1.3 million at the end of next school year, which is about 10% of your expenditures. And that's the fund where we, a few years back, if you all remember, we had to write a corrective action plan to the agency because we had too much fund balance. And so we've been purposely trying to lower that fund balance. And so it's at a level now where it should be maintained at that level. It really shouldn't go beneath that anymore. and restricted the interest and sinking fund. Again, that's the one that has that interesting fund balance, because if you look at it, it's $25.2 million, which is 66% of expenditures, but once you take out that payment that's due July 1st, August 1st, it's, then you end up with $12.3 million at 32% of the expenditures. So our local taxpayers, how does this budget affect our local taxpayers when it comes to them paying taxes? We have, for a number of years, maintained $1.04 per $100 of tax value tax rate. So 104 is our tax rate for our maintenance and operation rate. And this is the rate that we've on occasion talked about, saying whenever we need more money and we can't find anywhere more to cut, and if the state's not going to help, that we're going to have to go to the public for a tax ratification election. This is the fund we're talking about, where you can increase it up to 13 cents more and go to $1.17. We're not proposing that at this time. So we're proposing that we maintain the same tax rate for next school year at $1.04. Now the debt service rate, which is the next bullet down, that one changes every year a little bit, and that depends on the principal and interest payments that we have that mature that year to pay for the bonds. And so you can see that in 2014, for instance, we were at 38.5 cents. And then when in 2015 we lowered it half a cent, and then in 2016 we had some larger debt service payments, probably because we sold bonds during that time or a little bit before then. So it went up a little bit. And then we lowered it again. And the reason those things happen, some of it could be because of the maturities when the principal and interest payments are due. The other thing that greatly impacts it are the values that the appraisal district assigns to our properties in our district. So as they increase the property values, then we're able to lower the rate because it's going to generate enough money even with a lower rate. So for this upcoming year, principally because of the sale of the bonds to finish phase 2 of Veterans Memorial High School, we're going to have to go up by 1.5 penny to the 40 cents, from 38.5 cents to 40 cents. Now we're still working with that. So when we actually come to budget to the adopting of the tax rate, which won't be for another 2 months, we might be able to work and get that down a little bit. It just depends. The appraisal district is still working with a lot of the taxpayers that are, gosh, I'm losing the word, appealing, there's another word, but yes, their taxable values, protesting, thank you, their taxable values. And so depending on how those continue when we monitor them, we may be able, if we're seeing that the appraisal district is able to maintain ground, then we may be able to lower that tax rate a little bit and closer to the 38.5 cents where it was this year. We'll let you know in a couple of months where we fall that. And here are just some examples that we'd like to provide for our taxpayers to show them. If you have a home, for instance, in the first category that is valued at $90,000 and you take, and it's where you live and you qualify for the homestead exemption, so you get a $25,000 reduction. So your taxable value becomes $65,000. Based on the tax rate that we're proposing, then your taxes for the school district would be $936, as opposed to this past year where they were $926. So you would have an annual increase of $9.75. The middle column is the one I'm going to focus on for just a second, because that is the median taxable value or assessed value of a home in Judson ISD. So $166,000 is the average, and if you take $25,000 for the homestead exemption and net to $141,000 of taxable value, you'll see that that homeowner will pay $2,032 per year, as opposed to $2,011 this current year. So they'll have an increase of $21.17. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide because, to be fully transparent, so let's say that last year you lived in a home that was the median price for the school district. Last year, or this current year, the median price is $155,520. And let's say you were one of those lucky taxpayers now that the appraisal district decided to go up on your values, and now your house moved to the next median to $166,000. If you, to just kind of, like I said, be transparent about the way that property value increases affect you. So even though you were paying you were paying $1,859 this current year for your taxes, next year, if your values went up in accordance with that from 155 to 166, then you would be paying $2,000, so an increase of $172 a year. And that's a combination mostly of the tax value increase, but also we are moving the rate up again at $0.015, so that's affecting it a little bit as well, from $1.42 to $1.44. And that's the presentation for the public hearing portion. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to try to address them. Yep.
Okay, and the meeting is adjourned at 6:50.